که ته په کومه ورځ کلاس نشي اخیستلی باید تاسو ته دې یا ایمیل وکړي یا ورته احوال ورکړي چې مثال زه اپاینټمنټ لرم چې لرم نن زه کلاس نشم اخیستی نو کېدای شي هغه تا ته کورنۍ وظیفه درکړي یا بل څه کار درکړي چې مثال هغه درس چې ستا نه دغه شوی دی
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Ann.
Good morning.
این نفر که
Hi guys, I don't need to be on the podium today. It's an Ann and Barb show.
So guys, I have an arrow on my box. Is that doing anything?
I don't know. I have an all about home ownership, go to event that won't disappear.
Yeah. No, I have an arrow over my face, which doesn't bother me, but I don't know if other people can see it.
No, I can't see an arrow on your face. It's probably just you could probably touch that to expand or to maximize.
Okay. It didn't do anything, so whatever.
Are you using your phone for it or your laptop?
Yeah. No, it's my phone.
Okay.
As long as nobody else can see it, that's okay.
No, I can't see it at all.
Okay.
We'll start in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Have we got the presentation up?
Give me 1 second. I don't know who's controlling the room. I know that I'm not an admin.
Okay. I just don't see it.
Bear with me, you guys.
Sure.
Raul, if you're in the room, could you please ensure that the presentation is up? You have admin access. Presentation, ladies. Good morning, everyone. We will begin the workshop in just a few minutes. We are working on a technical area right now to ensure that the presentation is viewed by all today. So we thank you for your patience this morning as we move this forward. Give us just a few moments. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are still working on our presentation. Just bear with us just a few more moments as we ensure that the presentation is able to be viewed by all of the participants and our presenters today. Please bear with us. We thank you for joining us on this wonderful weather Wednesday. Okay, so it looks like we have the presentation up. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for Home Ownership Chapter 1, To Buy or Not to Buy a Home. My name is Tremaine Hickson, and I am the Manager of Community Impact here with LCMC. And we have two wonderful presenters, Miss Ann Jackman and Miss Barbara Benson, that will be joining us or presenting the workshop with you. So we're not going to delay even further. We've already had a few delays this morning, but that's what we get. It seems like on a wonderful weather Wednesday. So take it away, you guys.
All right. Thank you, Tremaine. So this morning we are going to be talking about home ownership. And our question for the day is to buy or not to buy. So on the second slide here, you'll see that in chapter 1 today, we're going to be talking, first of all, is home ownership right for me? Should I be thinking about this? Are there some benefits? Also, are there some disadvantages of owning your own home? How much does it cost? And that doesn't just mean the cost of the home, that means all the costs involved in being able to purchase the home. If I do think I want to buy a home, what should I do first? How do I find a home that I think I can afford and a place where I want to live? So that's what we'll be covering today. Next week in chapter 2, we'll be going much more into detail about financing that home. So this week we're going to see if we want one, if we can afford one. And next week we're going to talk about how we get that home financed. So we'll explain what is a mortgage or a loan. And we'll explain to you there are many different kinds of mortgages, some of which are really important and have great benefits, especially for first-time home buyers. So we'll talk about the requirements and the qualifications in order to get a mortgage or a loan. We'll talk about the rates that you will pay. That's the interest rates, because that can often be something you have to be very careful about. You want a very good deal on the interest rates. How many years the loan will be, how important your credit score is when you go to get a mortgage or a loan. And then we'll give you some examples of some mortgages and loans. Okay, so a lot about funding next week. But this week, if we go to the next slide, please, let's find out if home ownership is right for me. So as I just mentioned, today we'll be talking about the benefits and disadvantages, the costs, which means when you understand all the costs, you're going to be saying to yourself, can I afford that home now? Or should I start doing some budgeting and some saving so that I can actually afford it a little bit later on? Maybe I can't afford it right now, but I need to get myself in a position where I can afford it. And there are a lot of costs involved, all sorts of fees. So we'll be talking about that in a little bit of detail today. We want you to understand the process of home buying, okay? And then we will have a quick chat at the end about the options for financing. All right, so quite a lot to cover today. And with that, let's turn it over to Bob and the next slide, please.
Okay, so hopefully we haven't frightened you away. And what we'll do is start with the good news, the possible benefits of home ownership. Probably many of you have heard about the idea that the value of the home will increase over time. And that is normally true. So even though it is a large purchase, unlike many other purchases that you make, in most cases, in a reasonable amount of time, the value of the home does increase. So there is a financial benefit, not just a financial cost. For many people who buy homes, one of the important elements is that sense of stability for your family. This is your place. your little part of the earth, wherever you've chosen. And it offers a sense of community, security, belonging. And that's not insignificant. It may not be something you can put a dollar sign on, but it could be of high value to you. And this gets into this idea of pride of ownership. I don't know about other home buyers, but I was amazed at that sense of, oh my goodness, this is mine, when my husband and I bought our first house. And even with all of the costs, on a good day anyway, you will have that feeling. Frequently, there are less rules to owning your own property than if you are renting. You can appreciate if you had a building, you would want those people who lived in your building to follow your rules. Well, so if you're living in your own space, there are your rules, of course. Now, keep in mind that, yes, there are legal requirements by the state, by the county, and so forth. But you do have more flexibility with your own property. You've probably heard about tax benefits when you get into financing a property, having a loan. There are some benefits. Please don't think that this will solve all of your money problems. It doesn't. But there is a little bit of a tax break most of the time when you are financing and you have a mortgage. Then there's the notion of the fixed rate long-term monthly mortgage payments. You're thinking, why is that a benefit? That doesn't sound good. These are payments. The idea is, in the first place, you can plan. If you'll notice, and we will talk about the details next week, fixed rate means that cost, that interest cost and payment every month is fixed. So you can plan. This is not something that's going to jump around as far as the cost is concerned. And over time, the idea is not only is the value of your home hopefully increasing, but in many cases, your job you will have higher salary as you move along in your job or you change jobs to a better job. And so you're paying a fixed rate for your home while the house is appreciating in value, and hopefully your salary is already going up. So it is a less of a burden over time. So those are some of the benefits. Would anybody be interested in offering another benefit that they might have heard about? If you could put it in the chat, and Tremaine can keep an eye on that, please. Have we missed anything? No, we haven't missed anything. All right, then let's look at the downside. On this next slide, please. Okay, what goes up can come down. There is the possibility that the value of your home will decrease. This happens during high interest rate scenarios or weak economic performance or lack of performance in the economy, and sometimes overbuying in the real estate market can cause then the prices of homes to be too high, and eventually they settle back to a more reasonable amount, and that could be a shorter term possibly, but still hurt any homeowner who has bought recently. So that is just something you have to understand, is it's not a guaranteed climb upward. Another hard one and we will get into this more, is repairs are your responsibility. You you could call the landlord, but the landlord is you. And so when things need to be repaired, you're the one who has to do the repairing and pay for it, or pay for it. We will be talking quite a bit about additional expenses. There are the expenses of buying the property and those direct costs. There are also the ongoing expenses, property taxes, homeowners association fees, house insurance, Those are all expenses. We'll get into the details, but we're trying to give you a sense of it isn't simply the cost of the house that you need to think about. And finally, and this ties into this idea of the possible decrease in the value of the home, it can be expensive to move if you've only lived in your home for a short period of time. At the very least, the costs of the upfront closing costs to buy and sell a home, you are experiencing in a much shortened period instead of having it, oh, well, if you only move once every decade or so, that's not going to be a hard amount of expense to deal with. But if you've just bought a house and now you have to move again, that's a lot more money in a much shorter period of time. Also, the value of the home could be fluctuating a little bit in shorter amount of time. Longer amounts of time generally mean that the home's value will be increasing over that longer period. Did we miss anything? Any disadvantages? Nobody has any thoughts?
No questions.
Okay, then we will keep moving to the next slide. We're going to start to get into all of the details on these costs. First up, and I suggested this just a moment ago, there are two basic types of costs. The first is the fees and the costs before the home is yours. And we'll get into those details in a minute. And then there are the costs once you own the home. So what's the big cost that everybody talks about, everybody is well aware of? This is what's called the mortgage cost and the down payment. In other words, the all-in cost just to buy the house. Some of the money you have to come up with most of the time. There are some examples we will tell you about next week where maybe you don't have to do a down payment. And then there is the loan, which is substantial, and the cost. You have to pay money to get that loan. And we will get into much more of the details on mortgages, as Anne mentioned, next week. As far as the closing costs, generally, there's a series of them, and we'll get into them in just a minute. Those are the fees that you pay to buy your home. So that's really, even before you get the keys to the house, you are starting to pay some fees to buy the house. There are the monthly recurring costs once you own the home, and we'll get into those. And then my favorite, the unexpected costs. And there's always a good story behind these. So let's get into those details. Anne?
All right, thank you, Bob. So next slide, we have the first couple of kinds of expenses or costs at closing. And these are the legal fees and the taxes. So again, closing costs is what you pay when you actually close on your house or when you sign all the papers for the house yours. Okay, so there'll be the cost of the house plus these other fees. So the first fees, like nobody can ever get away from this, there'll be some legal. You'll have to pay an attorney because you do want the paperwork drawn up correctly. You'll have to do some things like pay for a title search and maybe title insurance, and also a recording fee. So these are all fees to ensure that the person that sells you the house actually owns the house themselves. Okay? You wouldn't want somebody to be scamming you. And these official searches are in the government records, and they're the way that you can be able to ensure that the person who's selling you the house does own the house and has the right. Okay, so very important that the legal fees, that you pay those. There are some taxes. Now, this is two different kinds of taxes. The transfer tax might be a few $1,000s. Okay, the transfer tax is kind of one of the big ones. Everybody has to pay transfer tax when they buy. and it's a percentage of the value of the house. So I'm going to pay less transfer tax on a house that cost me $200,000 and a lot more transfer tax if I'm lucky enough to be able to afford a house that cost me $500,000. Okay, the transfer tax gets bigger the more the house costs. The other thing that you may have to pay at closing. Now, this is a little unusual, property taxes. So property taxes are something that you have to pay to the government every year that you own the house. Okay, it pays for various things like the libraries, the schools, the police department, that kind of thing. So everybody who owns a house has to pay property taxes. However, it can be part of the closing costs. This is because sometimes your lender, that's the person who lends you the money for the home, your lender will require that you pay some of the first year's property taxes up front. Okay, so they'll say, in order to make sure that everything's going to go well with this purchase and that we're secure in lending you money, we are going to ask that you pay some of those first year's property taxes up front. Okay, and it varies. It might be 6 months, it might be the whole year, but you will have to pay some property taxes, usually, not always the case, but usually up front. Okay, so the next slide, please. Now let's talk about, that was, as I said, the legal and taxes, those fees. Now we're talking about the financing fees when you close. Okay, so as you'll see, there are a lot of fees that you're going to be paying when you buy the house.
And someone has a question. Can you please repeat the meaning of, and I cannot see the last portion of that, the meaning of the recording fee?
Oh, yes. So the recording fee is simply the money that the government charges you for your purchase to be put into the official records. So again, it's another fee that is a government fee. And then anybody who went to buy the house from you in a few years, they would be able to go and do that title search. And now the title or deed of the house is in your name because it's been correctly recorded in the government records. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. So
We have another question.
Oh, okay.
This one says, could you please explain what additional insurances are recommended for the house? For example, sewer, septic, electric, or others? Are those insurances always offered separately? Where can we get advice for this topic?
So Bob will be talking a little more about insurance further on, but I'll just say that in general, you're going to want, same as you have usually renter's insurance, you're going to want property insurance. Okay, the property insurance offers a variety of insurances. So there will be some insurances you have to have, like the structure of the house, the contents of the house. There'll sometimes be optional things like sewer or water, flood damage insurance. So there'll be one main kind of insurance, and within that one main policy, there might be some options. And the way that you find insurance is you'll just usually, talk to your friends or talk to the bank and ask them who are some big insurance providers. For example, just off the top of my head, Nationwide is a pretty main one. I'm not saying they're the best, but you'll easily find, there are probably half a dozen really big main insurance companies, and there may be one that your particular lender prefers to work with. So it's always best to ask the realtor and your lender what you should do about house insurance. Okay, and then they'll fill you in on all the details. There's a lot there. But in the main, they'll say you have to have at least this, and then there'll be a couple of other options, and you'll have to decide if you want those two. But again, probably the realtor and the bank are the best people to advise you, or you can also ask your friends, if they have good insurance, who their insurance broker is. Okay, I hope that answers the question. So let's go on then to closing cost financing. And these are great questions. Thank you so much. So there are some slightly technical sounding fees here, but they're all very standard fees. And usually they are done to either protect the loan or to protect you in your house ownership. So first of all, there'll be some things which protect the home. So an appraisal fee and a survey fee, plus home inspection or pest inspection fees. These are all fees that you pay to an expert or a professional who does this for a living, who will go to the house and say, okay, let me check around the house and make sure that the property is what it says it is. So I have a story about this. So actually we went to once buy a house on Staten Island, actually. And when the survey was done, the professional came back and said, they have already sold off part of the land and the garage. They said they no longer own the land and the garage that clearly belonged to the house. So they said, what the man is telling you is not true. He's telling you that you're buying the house and the garage. You are not. You're only buying the house. They sold the garage to the next door neighbor on the other side. So that doesn't happen often, but it can happen. That's why you need a survey done. And the surveyor will tell you that, yes, this is the property. This is where the boundaries are. It's in the records and everything's fine. The home inspection and pest inspection, this is someone you get to go round to make sure that the house hopefully doesn't have any disastrous problems. So this person would be the person who might say, ooh, you know how that upstairs looks beautifully painted? They just painted it because there's mold underneath. This house has a big mold problem. Or they might say, as we found out once to our cost also, there's something wrong with the roof. Okay, so, they do a lot of inspection of places that you won't be able to look and that you won't know what you're looking for. Like I can look at the room and say it looks beautiful. A surveyor can look at the room and go, uh-oh, I think there's mold on this wall. We need to do some more tests. Okay, so that's very important. And the appraisal fee is simply done by the lender. So it costs you money, but the lender will want the house appraised. And that's just usually to make sure that if the lender is lending you, let's say, $200,000 to buy your house, that the house is actually worth at least $200,000, okay? You might think it's worth that, but maybe the appraiser will come back and say, for a lot of reasons, this house is just not worth that much. And then the lender will say, okay, I'm not really sure I can lend you that much then, because then my loan is dodgy. I'm lending you more than the house is worth, okay? So again, these are all very standard fees. You don't have to worry about them, but they do just ensure that what you're buying is worth what you're paying for it. Okay? That there's going to be no unexpected problems once you move in. So then we have a credit report fee. We'll talk more about this in a minute, but usually the lender will run a credit report to make sure that you're a good risk. There'll be usually mortgage insurance. If you're borrowing a certain amount percentage-wise of the home from your lender, usually about 80%. So if the house costs $200,000, if I'm borrowing more than $160,000, then probably I will have to have mortgage insurance. This is just an annual fee and it gets tacked onto your mortgage, okay? It's not usually an awful lot of money, but it's another fee that you have to pay, and you have to pay it every year. If you're not borrowing much on the house, it may not be required. You will have to have, as I just explained, homeowners insurance. That is really important because if anything happens to your home while you own it, like a fire or flood damage, or there's a terrible wind and the roof is damaged, you will want your homeowner's insurance so that you can make a claim against it. Again, if you're borrowing money from a lender, the lender will usually require that you have this insurance, and they'll talk to you about it, okay? And then sometimes there's a homeowners association fee. So occasionally Not always, but particularly in the case of condos or townhouses, but sometimes single family homes too, you will belong to what's called a homeowners association. This is generally because part of the property where you live, so say for example, you live in a condo, there may be some common areas, right? There may be, if you're really lucky, there may be a swimming pool, right? There may be just a recreation room, a meeting room. There may be a couple of rooms set aside for that. There may be some landscaping needs to be done outside the condo property. So the homeowners association usually takes care of all those costs, which are common not only to you, but to other people. Okay, so it's kind of an easy way of just everybody sharing the cost of those things that you all have a stake in or have a slight ownership in that you want to be nicely maintained, right? You don't want to go up to your beautiful condo and find that the grass hasn't been cut and people have left trash lying around. Like, you don't want that. So that's what the homeowners association fee covers. Sometimes it's not very much. I live in a single family home and we have some common area landscaping, and also my trash is collected by the association, arranges that. And my fees are only a couple of $100 a year. Okay, but beware, in some condos, it can be $600, $800 or more per year. So definitely make sure you know how much that fee is.
We have a question.
Okay.
Are the closing costs mandatory?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, occasionally you might be able to get away, like some of the smaller closing costs might not be mandatory. So for instance, if you don't borrow very much, there won't be any mortgage insurance that's mandatory. But in general, yes, these closing costs, so I hate to tell you this, but there are some more also. But these are the main ones, and we put them here because usually you do have to pay all of these. So this is another reason that you have your realtor and that you have your attorney, because they will make sure that you pay only the fees that you have to pay, but that you do pay all the fees that you do have to pay. Okay, so they're the best ones to advise you. But yeah, in general, you do have to pay all of these. And some of them are not much. You know, the recording fee is probably $50. So they're not all huge fees. Usually the property transfer tax is the big one.
Another question we have, what does it mean, credit report fee?
Okay, we're going to be talking about that again in a minute. So can we hold that question for a second? I'll come back to that. I will definitely come back to that. So let's go to the next slide. So things to know about your closing costs. So here we're kind of summing it all up for you. So we're saying that in general, about 2% to 5% of the purchase price of the home is what it's going to cost you in closing costs. Now, again, this is generally, so you may be buying something where there's a bit of a different scenario. And we will tell you next week that first-time home buyers are people who often can escape some of these fees. Okay, sometimes the lender or the government will pay some of these fees for you. But generally in a regular, normal situation, your closing costs are going to come to about 2% to 5% of the cost of your home. So again, the more expensive the home, the more fees you'll have to pay. So again, my example is if you're buying a house that costs $200,000, 2% would be about $4,000. 5% would be about $10,000. But that's about the range, okay? Not always, but just as a guiding line. And certainly tune in next week to find out how first-time home buyers can escape those costs. And some closing costs, as I mentioned before, do have to be paid in advance. For example, the property tax piece. And these go into what's called, and we're telling you this just so you know the vocabulary, this will go into what's called an escrow account. So see that word escrow. This is simply monies that you have paid in advance, like your upcoming year's property taxes, that the lender holds onto for you and then pays over to the government, to the local municipality, so that you've paid your property taxes, okay? You don't pay it directly to the municipality, you pay it to the lender. So it goes into this special account called an escrow account so that the lender can't do anything else with it except pay it where it's supposed to go. Okay, so it's just a little protection for you being in an escrow account, but you'll hear that word, so that's what it means. And again, more examples besides your property taxes might be your mortgage insurance or your home insurance. If you need to borrow most of the cost of your house, then usually the same situation will happen where you'll actually pay your homeowner's insurance to your lender and they'll pay it to the insurance company. Okay, that's just their safeguard to make sure that your home is protected. And some lenders do offer mortgages, you know, this is the great news, with no closing costs, although beware, don't get too excited. It very rarely happens. You have to fit very special circumstances that we'll tell you about next week. But mostly you do have to pay at least some closing costs, if not all of them. And be very careful too, because sometimes when you don't have to pay these closing costs, the trade-off is that the interest rate for you borrowing that money to buy the house will be higher. So maybe instead of, say, 4%, if I have no closing costs, my interest rate might be 5%. So in effect, it means you don't pay the costs up front, but they are spread over the life of the loan. So it's kind of like the lender gets you one way or the other, but sometimes it is advantageous if you don't have a lot of money up front to be able to have the higher interest rate and pay those costs over time. Okay, sometimes it ends up being a lot more money and you don't want to do it, but we'll fill you in more on that next week. All right, so if there are any more questions, otherwise we'll go back to Bob to talk about your recurring costs.
Okay, so at this point you've bought the home. Now what as far as the monthly and recurring costs? And some of this is going to start to sound familiar because what you have to start dealing with as part of the closing, the actual settling of the purchase and buying the home, now is going to become a recurring cost. And the first of them is property taxes, as Anne already mentioned, for each home, condo, townhouse, single family home. There are property taxes. They go to the local government and they're what fund the school systems and so forth. And it's also mentioned that mortgage insurance, which is the cost that protects the lender if you don't pay your mortgage. And as she mentioned, this is when you're borrowing more than 80% of the purchase price of your home. You can appreciate that bank or lender is going to want to protect their investment in your property. And so they want that insurance. And guess who pays for it? You, every year. So that's what that's about. So of course, it's not the largest bill probably that you'll have to deal with, but it's one of those incentives, if you will, to think about how much of a down payment do you want to put on the purchase of your home, because it will be recurring every year until you've paid down on your loan. And then there's homeowners insurance. Whether you have a lender or not, whether you own the home outright or not, my humble opinion is that is an enormous asset that you now own, are responsible for. Insurance to protect your investment is very important. So back to that question about which kinds of insurance and how much, some of it has to do with your personal willingness to take risks. But when you think about the value of a home, this may be your largest purchase that you make. How are you going to protect it? It's worth your time to spend thinking about elements of protecting that home from, and then you have to think of from what? From fire, from flood, from storm damage. You'll have to think about those types of risks and how much you want protection from those types of risk. So some of it is required, especially if you're borrowing, some of it is going to be your personal risk appetite. Important, very important, though, to think about, given how important this investment is to your financial health. But in general, what homeowners insurance does do is protect the home and contents from damage or loss. So if we can go on to the next slide. More monthly and recurring costs. And again, Anne talked about these homeowner association fees. These are for the common areas, maintenance in the common areas, grass cutting in the summer and shoveling snow in the winter on the common sidewalks and so forth. These would be, again, recurring because you're still while you're living there. The grass needs to be cut in the common areas, and the snow needs to be carted away. Beyond that, there would be the property upkeep and use, which is your own. In other words, if you have a cute little townhouse, there may be common areas that are covered by the homeowners association, but right by your back door, you've got a cute little patio and a cute little backyard, and that is yours to take care of. So that's why we've got lawn mowing there, exterior, interior maintenance of that townhouse, painting, or inside or out. And then keep in mind that utility costs are also yours. Electric, gas, water, TV, internet, whatever. Those are all now yours. There's no landlord that's going to take care of any of that. So they are recurring costs, normally monthly.
We have a question in the chat, and it says, what is the average mortgage fixed rate in Maryland or Montgomery County?
I have no idea what the going rate is right at the moment. The good news is rates are fairly low right now. The less good news is there's an awful lot of talk of increasing interest rates. So I would guess rates aren't going to get any lower right now, but I don't actually know what the rate is for the long-term fixed rate mortgage. And you don't either, Anne, huh? Okay. Not hard to just Google it.
Yeah.
It's real easy. Just go out online and Google what's the fixed rate, the lowest fixed rate long-term mortgage. They'll give you all kinds of examples. Anything else, Raul?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, let's move on to one more type of cost, and this is where you get the great stories. Unexpected costs. You've got everything planned, you've got it all budgeted out, and for all of us homeowners who every time there is a heavy storm and there's wind, heavy rain, we watch. What's going to happen to that tree that I should have had trimmed, or my house sits in a little bit of a low dip in the land, and I sure hope that sump pump keeps working. Even when you plan, even when you think through all of the things that need to be fixed and repaired, believe it or not, you will need to fix and repair things you didn't expect to, whether it's as my neighbor had, the small hole in his roof when a piece of a tree came down, or the broken windows when snow crashed through our basement windows once. Who would have thought? That's hard to imagine it happening, but these crazy things happen. So rainy day funds are always good to have as part of your general planning process for owning a home. So, the examples are numerous: plumbing, electrical, flooring, appliances. Even when you think something is new, our furnace went out after something like 3 years. It's like, how is that possible with a guarantee of however many years? These things happen. And again, outside, there are plenty of good stories about roofs. It's a sad but true. And if anybody has any good stories, we're collecting them. And
we have another question. What kind of expert is needed for maintenance? Let me try to read that again. What kind of expert is needed for maintenance of machine room?
Maintenance of machinery?
Maintenance the machine room.
The machine room. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by machine room.
Oh, wait a minute. There's something prior to that. Okay. About maintenance. How often the machine room of the house is recommended to check for being sure that this works properly?
Are you if you're talking about something like a furnace, there, for example, that is, furnace, air conditioning. The normal process would be you find a company that you are comfortable with, and you have that company inspect, and if necessary, repair every year, preferably in the winter, for the furnace before winter comes, and for air conditioning before it gets too hot. Not always so easy because these guys obviously are very busy at that time of year. But that would be appropriate maintenance. You have to find a company that you're comfortable with. But my thought would be annually for something like that, because those are important appliances, if you want to call them that. They're more than appliances. They're important for your comfortable living. Does that do it for you? I don't know, Anne, if you have any thoughts to add.
No, I think that's probably good. So it really, what you're talking about are the systems of the house, like your heating, your air conditioning, your hot water heater that heats your water. So, often someone will just come and check all of it, maybe once a year. I have to be honest, when we've lived in newer houses, we have not at first done it once a year, but you certainly should do it every couple of years. And, it just gives you peace of mind. You don't need it done more than once a year, but just do it. If you can do it once a year, it's great. It just gives you peace of mind that everything is working properly.
Which that in and of itself has a huge value, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If we're done with questions, let's turn it back to Anne. And where do you start?
All right. So I'm going to now go back to the question about credit reports and credit history. So on this slide, we're talking about what do I do first if I want to own that home? Like, where on earth do I start? I have this great dream, and what exactly am I going to do to make that dream come true? So, as we, I hope, have pointed out, look at the costs. Okay, you have to consider how much this is going to cost you. The cost of the house, all the fees, all the recurring costs over the years. You have to think about all of that and make sure you can afford it. Look at your savings. The more that you can put, as Bob explained, a down payment or a deposit on the house, the better it is, because the less you have to borrow, okay? And sometimes you will be required to pay all those closing costs out of your savings. You may not be allowed to borrow that money, although, as we'll tell you next week, sometimes you can. Okay, but it's always a good idea, to have at least some savings. Sometimes it's required. The lender might say you have to put down at least 5% the cost of this house or something like that. Sometimes they don't. It varies a lot. But look at your savings and make sure they're as good as they can be before you start this process. Make a budget. So as you know, a budget is a plan for income and expenses. Make a budget and see if you can slot into that budget the loan repayment each month and all the other recurring costs. All of your debt, just as a guideline, all of your debt, so that means if you have maybe a car loan, a student loan, all of that debt, or, I hesitate to think anybody would have credit card debt, but if you do, that's still debt. So all of those debts added together should not be more than about a third, 36%, which is about a third of your monthly income. So if you already have an enormous car loan and an enormous credit card debt, you need to pay a lot of that down before you can really think of adding to your debt or taking out another loan. Okay. Here's the next one. Find out your credit score and improve it if possible. So your credit score and your credit history are something that you can find out quite easily by going online. You can get your credit report by just typing in several things, one of which is annualcreditreport.com. So you can get your annual credit report, and this shows the lender if you are a good risk. Okay, they'll look at that credit report and say, oh my goodness, look how much they owe in debt. This is terrible. We can't lend them any more money. Or they'll say, wow, they hardly owe anything. They have their own car, like they pay all their bills on time. This person is going to be great for us to lend money to. They'll be a good risk. Now, your credit score is a part of that credit history, and the credit score is out of 850. If you have less than about 580, that's not so good. You want to get it higher. If you have 670 or above, that's considered very good, and you're just fine. And why is this important? Why do we care what your credit score is? We care because sometimes, in the first place, if it's terrible, you may not be able to get a loan. But in the second place, you may still get a loan, but the interest rate that you have to pay may be much higher. Okay, so it can be 1, 2, 3, 4% higher than if you have a good credit score. So get a hold of your credit report and your credit score now, which is just how good of a risk you are, how well you've paid your bills, how much debt you owe, like whether these people want to lend you money is effectively what it tells a lender. And make sure that it's as good as it can be, okay? If you have a lot of debt, it's going to be a bad score, and you need to pay off some of that debt because otherwise it's going to cost you a lot of money in high interest rates. Okay, so that's why those things are important. And again, you can just Google, how do I get my credit score and credit history? But one of the ways is annualcreditreport.com. And it's free. Once a year, it's free. So again, as I just said, make sure that you are this good candidate for a loan. It's going to look much better for a lender if you have a steady work history. Okay, if you've worked in your job for like several years and maybe you got promoted as well, that's going to be great. If you keep changing jobs every 2 months, that's not going to look so good. And make sure that you get together all your paperwork before you apply for the loan. So you want to make sure that you have all your pay stubs, all your bank account statements, details of any amounts of money that you own, like credit card debt history or that loan that's maybe a car loan. So get all the paperwork that you think might be appropriate, get it all together because that will save you time. And also, this is very important. See if you can get pre-qualified for a loan. This means simply that you will get all the paperwork together. You've decided you have some savings. I have a good enough credit score. I've been in my job several years. I don't have a lot of other debt. I look really good to get that mortgage or loan to buy a home. So you'll go into the bank or other financial institution and you'll say, I would like to be pre-qualified. This simply means that the bank will look at all your paperwork and they will say to you, you're a pretty good risk. We are willing to lend you, let's say, $250,000. Then they will give you a little piece of paper that says, this potential homeowner is pre-qualified for a loan of up to whatever it is, $250,000, maybe $350,000, depending on your income. So it's really good because then when you go to buy that home and you put in an offer, it's really good that you're pre-qualified because maybe the house costs $220,000 plus some closing costs. And you can say to the seller, I'm already pre-qualified. Like, you don't have to worry about me. Here's the proof, the piece of paper that the bank will lend me this much money. Okay? So it saves time. And I'm going to be honest, in this day and age where house prices are rising and where there's a lot of competition for houses, you want to be in as good a position to buy that home as you can be. And one of the best ways is to get this pre-qualification. So again, you'll be able to look at the slides when you get them, but you can also speak to your realtor or go into the bank and say to them, I'm thinking of buying a home. Like, can you tell me about being pre-qualified? And they'll explain the whole thing to you, okay? But it's very well worth doing if you're thinking of buying that home soon. So let's go on to the last couple of slides. The next one is, goodness, now I'm all excited. I think I can afford a house. I'm pre-qualified. Everything's looking great. How do I find that home I want to buy? So think about a few things. Obviously, the most important thing is what you can afford, right? How much can I actually afford? A hint here is don't go looking at houses that are more expensive than you can afford, because then you'll just be very upset and kind of disappointed when you have to buy something that's not as expensive and not as nice. Think about things like the location. Does it matter to you if it's near a great school? Does it matter if it's near the highway or the metro system, right? Think about the location. And obviously, the better the location, the more it will cost. So maybe, like, I would love it to be right at Shady Grove near the metro, but maybe that's too expensive. So I figure out how far away I can live, and I'll have to take the bus or drive to the metro every day, okay? It's a question of what I can afford. But think what's important to you. And the size and the type of home, okay? You know, if you have a young child and you're really expecting that you would like to have another child soon, then try and buy a house that has enough bedrooms for you, or that has enough space for you, or that has that little yard that you'd like your children to play in. Okay, so think forward. Don't just think necessarily about what I need today, but think, I'd like to stay in this house to 5 to 10 years. So what do I need for me to be able to stay in the house that long without having to keep moving? Because as Bob mentioned, keep moving is expensive. Some loan programs do require that you buy a property in a certain area or from a certain list, and we'll talk about that next week. You can do something called rent to own. That's not offered very often anymore, but it is an option sometimes, and we'll talk about that next week. And then you start by finding a realtor. Maybe some of your friends have used a great realtor. Otherwise, you know, use a realtor that seems to have a good reputation in the area. Maybe you see a lot of signs for that realtor, and the realtor should be located in the area that you want to buy the home, because then they'll be really, really familiar with that area, okay? So if you want to buy a home in Baltimore, find yourself a realtor in Baltimore, okay? And then on the next slide, just to sum up, so see what you can afford. This is the most important thing, because homes do cost more if it's in a safe area, but maybe that's the most important thing to you, is that it's in a safe area. So, you know, then you're willing to pay a little more. But generally, homes will cost more if they're in a safe area, if they're near better schools and facilities like transportation, great shopping, if they're in very good repair, or if they're newer. Okay, so we're getting a bit close to the end, but think about, you know, what is important to you in finding that home of your dreams, and make a list. Okay, these are things I absolutely have to have. These are things, okay, if I could have it's great. You know, my husband's pretty handy, so maybe it doesn't have to be in the best repair because he can fix it. Or maybe, like, I don't even know what a hammer is, so maybe we need to stay away from any kind of home repair. All right, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, back to Bob to sum up today.
Any questions? I don't think so. So very quickly, on the last slide, what we covered today was thinking about even buying a home and the benefits of owning your own place versus the disadvantages. Hopefully we haven't really scared you away with all of those costs, but they are considerable, and you'll be much better off to know about them up front and be ready for them, whether they are the before you own the home or as part of those recurring costs, which we went over in some detail today. And then Anne has just talked a little bit about where do you start as far as thinking about the type of own, where, and hopefully you can find a realtor that you really have comfort in. It's tremendously important that that realtor know the area. And if you're not comfortable, find somebody who is, because this is an important resource for you to finding the place that you really want to live in. Yes, you can go looking on your own and go out online, and that gives you a little bit of a feel for what's out there. But a good realtor is a very important resource for really figuring out, one, what are the choices, and also a little bit on the pricing too. Because obviously anybody who's selling a home is not going to want to just give it away at a good deal for you. So many things to be thinking about. As Anne has mentioned, and I have already mentioned, next week we're going to deep dive into financing a home, understanding a lot more about what a mortgage loan is, the different kinds of mortgages. It will not be everything under the sun. We couldn't possibly cover all of that, but to give you some ideas of the different types of, again, financing choices that you might be able to qualify for. And this will just get you going, hopefully, as you think about whether you really want to go down the road to home ownership. And we'll give you some examples of those mortgage loans so that you have some sense of what we're talking about. So with that, thank you for your time and attention, and we'll turn it back to Tremaine. I'm not hearing any more questions or comments. So, and there's Tremaine.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. People have, I know this was a well-informed workshop, just informing all the attendees, all the participants about purchasing homes and just how to start with going that route of being a homeowner. So we thank you so much. We thank you for all of the participants that have joined us to class. Today, we had about 78 people that participated with us today. So we're super excited about the workshops during the course of the week. If you all should need me to reach out to me to get any additional information or assistance, my email address is in the chat. It is Tremaine at lcmcmd.org. Thank you so much for participating and joining us, and have a wonderful Weather Wednesday today. Bye-bye. See you next week. Have a good one, everyone. We still have a few more people.
Good questions, Bob.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really good. People were really listening. I thought those were fabulous questions.
Is there anything we need to talk about?